going on, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome to the Gravity Podcast. I am one of your hosts, Chris. Thank you for choosing to tune in today. Hey, folks, Jaimie and I are excited to continue this conversation. How do we stay grounded in a world full of noise and chaos? How do we keep both feet on the ground and not get carried away? It's not easy. At least we've found in our lives that it's not easy, and we really depend on our relationships, experiences, and values to help us stay grounded. Today's guest is going to be 44-year veteran firefighter Tim Sears. You'll hear they call him Tall Tim. You're not really going to be able to see it here in the YouTube video why they call him Tall Tim. But if you ever meet him in person, you'll instantly know why they call him Tall Tim. Tim and I have an interesting story where our paths collide, and we'll get into that here in the interview in just a second. But before that, folks, I want to talk about 484 Hero. 484 Hero was really born out of a tragedy. My friend, Deputy Daniel McCartney, was killed in the line of duty while serving as a Pierce County deputy in Washington State. And his wife, Sierra, and her boys decided to carry on both his legacy and also just pay it forward, express appreciation towards the law enforcement community for all that we do every single day. So on January 8th, 484 Hero is hosting a Coffee with Dan event that's happening all around our country. Coffee shops can get involved by hosting these events. They don't even have to pay for the coffee if they don't want to. 484 Hero will do that. However, I know a lot of coffee shops want to cover the coffee or split it with 484 Hero so that the money goes further. So go ahead and look down in the show notes. There's a link to 484 Hero. If you're listening and you're like, I'm not a coffee shop, you can also get involved by either donating money or buying merchandise from the 484 Hero store. With that, folks, let's get into this interview with Tall Tim Sears. Tim Sears, welcome to the Gravity Podcast.
Man, I am so excited to be a guest on your show. It's going to be just a kick in the pants. I can't wait.
I think we're going to have a lot of fun here, and I've been excited for this. Obviously, we've had to move schedules around because you and I are both busy men.
Yep.
And I'm excited for what we're about to get into. Hey, for folks that don't know you, Tim, if you don't mind introducing yourself to the listeners.
So my name is Tim Sears, but everybody calls me Tall Tim. And when you meet me, you'll understand why. I came from the first responder world, originally kind of from the family side, was police side, and I went to the dark side and became a firefighter. And was that?
I said I like the way you said that.
Oh, yeah. And I was in the fire service for 44 years and worked in 4 different departments, and was just blessed to be able to serve and continue to serve. Now I'm the director for first responders for Stronger Families, and just really diving into that. And I'm sure we'll talk more about that as we go along. I've been married for 29 years. We have two kids, a 28-year-old son and a 25-year-old, my 25-year-old daughter.
Wow. What life experiences between the fire service and then being in the family life that long? I guarantee, well, I can't even just say I guarantee. Tim, obviously you and I know each other pretty closely, and I know that you have a lot of perspectives to share with the listeners. What was the early days like being a firefighter? Where did you start? Where did you kind of go? And what was that experience like?
So it's kind of interesting because I really thought I was going to become a police officer. I really did, because my dad was a reserve officer at one time. My uncle was a police officer. A lot of our friends were police officers, but we had a neighbor that was a firefighter. And I was having some difficulties as a teenager. My uncle got shot, and he was a police chief for the Yakima Indian Nation. And he, 2 of his guys got shot. One of them got shot in the leg. One got shot in the stomach on one specific call. And my uncle got shot in the face.
Oh, wow.
And it really affected our family. and it really affected my uncle. And the one thing I like to tell people is that back then there wasn't a chaplain program, there wasn't a peer support program, there wasn't, SISM, there wasn't anything like that. And so the only thing my uncle knew how to do was to go back to his roots, and his roots started in the mountains. He was grew up on the reservation, and when it got so bad that he wasn't able to look at himself in the mirror, he left my aunt and my three cousins and girls and moved to the mountains, and that was his way of handling his wellness, and trying to uh, just understand how to deal with his pain and suffering.
Yeah.
He went back to his roots of being a kid and just packed everything up and moved to the mountains. So it was a really sad situation, and it ripped me apart because I was really close to my uncle. My uncle kind of raised me, if you will, in a lot of respects. And I had a neighbor who was a firefighter, and I was about 13 years old. And he said, "Hey, Tim, I think you should come down to the firehouse when you get off of, basketball practice or baseball, whatever." And so I did. I would ride my bike down there and just hang out at the firehouse. And sometimes he was by himself. It was a small department, Toppenish. It's a small area. And I would go down there, and he would say, "Hey, help me roll hose, help me wash this rig, help me do this, that, whatever," because if nobody was there, it's primarily volunteers that were there. And he just kind of took me under his wing, and I just kept going back and back, and he always welcomed me. And when I turned 16, so about 3 years later, I turned 16, all the guys at the firehouse knew who I was and stuff. The chief showed up, and they called me on my birthday, and they said, "Hey, we want you to come down to the firehouse." So I went down to the firehouse, and there was a brand new set of bunker boots and I wear size 16 shoes. So, I mean, we're talking, this is a big deal, probably half the budget of the department or something, to buy my boots, and an old pair of yellow bunker pants and coat, and just a beat up helmet. And they said, "Hey, we want you to join our team. We want you to be a part of our family." And that's when I became a volunteer, and I never looked back.
The power of mentorship, right? I mean, he, like you said, he pulled you under your wing, under his wing,
Mm-hmm.
and you got to learn the skills
Yep.
of the. My guess is, you didn't say this, but my guess is you were learning a lot more than just firefighting in those times.
Absolutely. Yeah. His name was Ron Cobb, and he's no longer with us. He's hopefully in heaven is where I'm hoping that he's at, and I'll get to see him again. But he was just a great guy, and really cared about the fire department, really cared about his community, and really stressed the importance of community,
Yeah.
and being a family, and reaching out to the other firefighters and their families, and really connecting in that respect. That was a big thing to Ron. And I learned, yeah, I did. I learned a lot from him.
Wow. Well,
And I learned from the other guys as well, but he was the one.
yeah. Oh, I'm sure. Well, I know that you had a short time going to Columbia Basin College and volunteering here in Benton County, but eventually you find your home at the Kirkland Fire Department. Can you tell us
Yeah.
about?
Yeah. Well, right before that, I was at WSU. I was in Go Cougs. I was in the firehouse right there at WSU, and that was a great experience. And I met a lot of really neat people, and got to see different types of calls and things from a college perspective. And it was good. And then it took a little bit of time. I have dyslexia, and I have ADHD and all that fun stuff that some of us guys have. And so it took me a little bit of time to get hired with the city of Kirkland. But when I went to the city of Kirkland and I took their test, it was really a great opportunity for me. And when they decided to hire me at the time, I was working as a assistant, a nurse practitioner, if you will, like a CNA, just a nurse assistant is basically what I was at Providence Hospital. And they were encouraging me to become a nurse and wanted me to go through school. And I thought, there's no way with my dyslexia and all the things that I'm dealing with, it just would be a really tough thing. And right about that time, the city of Kirkland called and they said, "Hey, we'd like to bring you on as a firefighter." So it was a great thing. It was a great opportunity for me to get in there. And I think one of the reasons why they hired me was because of my water rescue background. I taught swim lessons and I was a lifeguard and taught life-saving skills and things like that to different folks to become lifeguards and stuff. And so they were like, "Hey, would you be able to start a water rescue program? We had a major drowning just this past summer." And I said, "Absolutely, I'd be honored to do that." So when I left my interview, I wasn't sure if I was getting hired as a firefighter or if they were wanting me to teach their people how to rescue people out of Lake Washington. So it was quite an adventure.
So how did this adversity of dyslexia, what have you had to do throughout your life to overcome that adversity?
That's a great question. I am very passionate about helping people. And so I think that stems back to when I was a kid. And I would do whatever it took in order to figure out what I needed to do in order to be successful. And so if it was a test or, whatever, I mean, you have to take tests in order to get into the fire service or police service, right?
Yeah.
And I failed a lot of tests. I failed probably 18 tests before I got hired with the city of Kirkland. But I feel like there's definitely the Lord wanted me at the city of Kirkland. And so I took that test and I scored well. I didn't score great, but I scored well enough to get hired. And when I was in the academy, I struggled with written tests. And but I had so many people that were encouraging me and trying to help me. Some of the guys I got hired with 7 other people, and they were like they liked me and they wanted me to succeed. And so they would drill me and make flashcards, and I mean all these things that they didn't need, but I needed it. But I was able to help them on the drill ground because I knew the job so well already. And so on the drill ground, I shined, but it was the written tests that I really struggled. So honestly, I just did whatever I had to do in order to be successful. And I had to take tests, being a firefighter too. I mean, you're constantly being tested on the materials that you're being trained on. I was on the hazmat team. I was on the water rescue team. I was a truckie for 20 years on the ladder truck, drove the tiller, that sort of thing. And there was tests on that stuff all the time. EMS, we were all constantly being, tested and trained in EMS. And I just did the very best I could. And just kind of would squeak by. So it's hard. It's really hard. I'm not gonna I'm not gonna lie. It's a for sure challenge for me. But my hands-on skills always me look real good, and that would overpower that written test that maybe I didn't score so high.
I saw you, and we'll get to it here in a little bit, how you and I came to meet, but I saw you read and reread and reread a paragraph in order to comprehend it. And if I remember correctly, you would actually have to visualize it as you read it. You put it in pictures in order
Mhm.
for it to be able to really grasp it and understand it.
Yeah, absolutely. That's exactly what I do. I highlight things, I underline things, I circle things. Sometimes I draw pictures. Sometimes I'll read something and then I'll just close my eyes and I will put it in a picture because I see things in pictures. Um, if you ask me to spell a word, I'm not going to be able to spell the word. I'm going to spell the word the way it sounds to me, but I'm not going to most likely spell it correctly. But if I, for example, I'm looking at the sign behind your head and it says 2 feet, gravity. And so for me, two is okay, there's two of them, right? There's two things. Feet, and I'm thinking, is it my feet, size 16, feet, or is it your feet that are size, 10? Or you know what I mean? Or is there 2 feet? Is there multiple feet? Gravity. Are those feet getting pulled down, or are they lifting up off the ground? That's how my mind thinks. And so as I'm reading, I have to really put it into a visual picture for myself to understand it. And it really helps me to talk about it. Like you and I would talk about things, and that would really help me capture what is being what is in writing.
Yeah. So you joined the fire service, obviously having a mentor, having that public service in your family blood, if you will. You have this mentor that really brings you under his wing. Now you're hired by the city of Kirkland. All this hard work has paid off. You're going to go out and save the world. Right? I mean, that's
Yeah.
everyone. Firefighters. Everyone
Yeah.
loves firefighters. You always show up to help people. You never show up on Christmas Eve and arrest mommy or daddy.
Yeah.
So now you're a firefighter. Was it just hair on fire? Amazing. This is the dream. And if so, how long was it that way before there was a shift?
Absolutely. I loved being a firefighter, and it was so rewarding for me. And remember, I started when I was 16 years old, and I got out in at the age of 60. And how do I it's so hard to explain because I really enjoyed it. The one thing I really enjoyed about it was I would go to work and I had no clue what I was going to go to, what the call was going to be. And there was some calls that I went on that it's like, I wish I wouldn't have gone on that call, or I wish I wouldn't have, been on that call. But for the majority, it was I just loved it. I to be able to serve your community really meant a lot to me. And for some people I've seen, whether police or fire, sometimes it's just a job. And it was never just a job for me.
Yeah.
And there was a few other guys that I got hired with that looked at it that same way. And I think that's the difference between, I'm going to say, maybe the older generation and the newer generation, because I think some of the newer generation look at our jobs as it's a job. And for me, it was, this is an opportunity. This is a way for me to give back. This is a way for me to help because I have a skill. I've been trained in skills on how to help people. And those people are going to call and ask for the help. And we're going to go there and we're going to be able to help them. And there's nothing, in my opinion, that's a greater reward than having someone say, thank you. Thank
Yes.
you for helping me. Thank you for helping my grandma. Thank you for helping, my brother. Thank you, whatever the case may be. Their house just burned down and they're saying thank you because we saved a little, mosaic special thing that was important to their family that we would look at and go, oh, just throw that in the garbage. It's
Yeah.
like, oh no, this is a family heirloom. And this is, we lost our entire house, but you saved our family heirloom. That is a big, big, big deal for that family. And you're a part of that. And that's something that's really cool. And I just love training too. Being able to go and do training, on the drill ground, out in the community, whatever, to be able to show off, to go to schools. And I didn't get to do that a whole lot in Kirkland because that program wasn't really set up. But every once in a while, we'd get invited to a school and we'd be able to share with the kids, what do firefighters do? What's good fire? What's bad fire? Stop, drop, and roll, all those kinds of things, and show off the rigs and that sort of thing. And I just loved that. I just loved being a part of that. So
You're a
you,
real you are a real life action hero figure. You're a GI Joe. I'm not joking. For kids, right? You'd see it in their eyes. you'd see it in their eyes, both police and fire. When you show up with these rigs with flashy lights on it, right? And you get out and you're wearing
Mhm.
your turnouts for you, we're wearing our gear. The kids are just like, oh my gosh.
Yeah, their eyes are so big and they just absolutely love being able to put on the headsets, put on a helmet. When they're a little bit older, we let them hold an axe, just things like that that they get to touch and feel. And I think it was I'm not sure exactly when it came about, but there was this, come out and touch a truck movement, and I was so excited for that because it wasn't just fire trucks, it was dump trucks. It was, big construction type, boom trucks and things like that, police rigs and all the different, big trucks that we see on the road. These kids got to touch and climb all over them and everything. And I just thought that was so cool that that they started doing that.
Yeah. Here in the Tri-Cities, there is, I think, still a program. They call it Kids Dig Rigs.
Mm.
And it's in our big park. And same thing. I mean, we're construction trucks and fire trucks and SWAT vehicles and police, just all
Yep.
kinds of different vehicles where kids get to come out. And now
Mhm.
it's not the Tonka truck in their hand that they're playing with or some video game. They get to see it in real life and get in the driver's seat. And it's just
Yep.
really exciting. Hey, just thinking back, I mean, I know this is going to be hard because I didn't prep you with this like a good podcast host would have. Over 40 years of service, what is there a call or maybe a couple calls that just really stand out that wow, like oh my gosh, I was part of this big fire or this big medical emergency? Was there one of those calls that you look back on and there's still just that feeling of pride of getting to serve your community in that moment?
I can't, honestly, it's hard to pinpoint a specific, fire or incident or something like that. But when you make a rescue, when you help someone, out of a fire, if you help someone out of a car that has been in an accident or a rollover, has gone down a hill, and you're extricating that person out of there, and they're okay, they're not broken, they're not, whatever, that is very, very rewarding. And utilizing the training. I was talking to someone the other day and they were like, well, how did you prepare for this? How did you prepare for that? And somebody said something. We were down in California and the crew was, we were with Stronger Families. We were down in California doing a train the trainer, and some of the crew that was on duty had to leave because they had a call, and it was a rollover. And one of the instructors I was with was not a first responder, and he's like, what's a rollover? And so I explained it to him, and he's like, oh my gosh, and then he
Yeah.
had all these questions when the crew got back and stuff like that. And so there's a lot of things that are in our world, in our, first responder world, that are ours,
Yes.
and we understand it, and the lay person just doesn't,
Yeah.
right? And so we're trained on how to take difficult situations. And what I was trained to do was to think, plan, and act, right? And you try to do that in training, but you also do that on the call. And so as you're responding, the dispatcher is giving you information that you're able to disseminate on your way there to figure out, okay, is this a rollover or is this just an accident? You know, wait a minute, this part of the neighborhood, they have a big hill. So maybe that rig went down the hill. Maybe we need to get another type of rescue rig coming, so that if we need to rappel down the side of this hill to make a rescue, we can do that. You know what I mean? It's all that kind of stuff that you're putting together. But no, I over my 44 years, I was involved in a lot of different things. The biggest house fire, or not, well, I'm not going to say house fire. The biggest structure fire that I was ever in was in Bothell. We came, it was, I can't even remember the year, but we came out of the fire station. I was on the ladder truck, and I was driving the front, and I had a newer tillerman in the back, and I had a newer captain in the rig. And so we're pulling out, and it was the holy, F, right, man, just dropped the F bomb right there on the Thomas head clock headsets. And I'm like, I thought, oh my gosh, I hit a cat, or hit a kid, or a bum, or whatever. I slam on the brakes as I'm coming out of the station, because I knew what direction I was going. And then as I turned, I could see the thermal column, and I knew exactly where it was. And it was in the next city, where we were in Kirkland, and it was in Bothell. And we get there, and it is a freaking huge fire. It was one thing that's real common over here in the Bellevue, Kirkland, Woodinville area that's really become real popular is these things called 5/1s. And basically what that means is the structure above the first floor is all wood. So it's wood frame, it's wood construction, it's all wood, right? And below it's probably concrete or steel or something like that. And they'll put, 10 stories up above. And so it's called a 5/1. And sometimes people call them taxpayers. That's where you've got people living upstairs, and then you've got businesses downstairs. Well, this was a place that was under construction, and it had all the curtains on the side, so the workers were protected from the elements, and that sort of thing. It wasn't completely closed in yet, and it caught fire. And the thing was like a city block huge building. And so when that fire went up, it was an inferno. I mean, the whole entire structure was just going crazy. And it looked like Bothell was the city of Bothell was just burning up, man. And there was other businesses around, because, with that amount of fire and heat, you're going to have a lot of heat. And so other buildings around it started catching on fire. We call them exposures. And so now we have exposure fires. And so it was a big mess for a long time. And that was the biggest structure fire that I had ever been on. And they were on that fire for probably a week.
Wow.
Just dealing with the hot embers and all that kind of stuff. I've been on a couple of other big fires. When I was over in Toppenish, actually, we went to Wapato. There was a place where they kept back apple crates and cherry cake crates and stuff, and they were wood, and they were all stacked up, and I think it was arson, but they caught fire. And once that got going, that was another like city block, huge, gigantic area where all these wood crates were, and they just freaking burned. Wow. It was crazy. That burned for like a month. I mean, they had to keep going through it, because you got to take big machinery in there and start pulling things out. And as they'd pull it out, it would, just light up again and stuff like that. So, yeah. Wow. And grass fires. I used to be, when I was in Benton County, we would fight grass fires from the Tri-Cities all the way to the Columbia River.
Wow.
Yeah.
What do you mean the Columbia River? Because obviously the Columbia River is through the Tri-Cities. So, so you're talking like up in the hills, like the Horse Heaven Hills.
Yep. Horse Heaven Hills. Yep. And there's a lot of wheat farmers up there.
Oh yeah.
And so if there was a fire and it became a wheat fire, it was, oh my gosh, fires are really dangerous, because they're really super hot, and they create their own wind. We know that wildfires do that. They create their own wind, their own weather, that kind of thing. Yeah. But with a wheat fire, it'll pop the tops off, especially depending on how the wheat is, at what maturity level it's at. But if it's dry, man, it'll just take the tops right off. And then the problem is sometimes the wind will shift, and you still have the stems that it's coming back the other way.
Oh, wow.
So you just don't know exactly what's going to happen with those types of fires. So you have to really, really be conscious about what you're doing. But we'd be out on I would see the sun go down. I'd see the sun go up. Literally 4 days we'd be out there.
Wow,
and just fighting fires, grass fires, all, and we literally take it all the way to the Columbia River, man.
man. Hey, a little bit ago you said there were some of those calls that you really didn't like or that you wish you wouldn't have seen. I don't expect you to go into detail because I don't want to trigger other people, but can you give maybe a general talk of what you meant by that?
So sometimes you would go on calls and like you're going, like, for example, I'll give you an example of one. It was on the freeway because 405 goes through Kirkland. And so we would have freeway calls. And this was probably, I don't know, 15 years ago or something. I can't remember exactly, but the call came in as an automobile accident on the freeway. And it was rush hour time. And that's when it was an hour, right? Now it's rush hour all the time. There is no downtime. It's rush hour all the time through 405
Yeah.
and that sort of thing, and I-5 as well. But we were responding to this call, and we could tell that it was, blocking because all the cars are just basically parked. And so we're trying to weave through, right? We're trying to weave through. Well, there was so much congestion that no one could move. And so we were literally, I bet, 400 yards from the actual accident. And so we jump off the rig. We got as far as we could go. We jumped off the rig. We ran up there, and we could see there was a fire, but we didn't understand exactly what was going on until we got there. And when we got there, there was a semi truck, and there was a second semi truck that was like rear-ended that semi truck. But the thing that was hard to take was, on the back of a semi truck, you've got that little bar that hangs down, that so you don't go underneath. Well, this commuter vehicle, van, got pushed from behind because it got rear-ended by the semi truck that was behind it, and it smashed this car, this commuter car, into the back of the truck in front of them. And there were people trapped inside. The car was on fire. The trucks were catching on fire. And we're hearing, when we got there, we could hear screaming, and there was not a thing we could do.
Yeah.
And we didn't have tools. I mean, we had some tools in our hands, but there was literally, there was nothing we could do. And people are screaming, help them, just this whole thing. And then it's like there was nothing. We didn't have water. We didn't have our apparatus. We didn't have our tools. We didn't have anything. And we basically stood there and watched these people die, burn to death in this fire. And then the screaming stopped, right? I mean, you hear the screaming from the vehicle itself, and then you hear the screaming from the people that are watching you, try to help these people, and there's really nothing you can do, and the screaming stops. And then people realize that the screaming in the car has stopped, and now they're even more upset. That call, it was almost surreal for me. And we didn't have SISM. We didn't have peer support. We didn't have anything like that. And so we ended up having to pick that vehicle up, because there's bodies inside of it. And we had to take it to a fire station, and we had to use our extrication tools to tear it apart in order to get the remains out of that car. And that was not easy.
Yeah.
That was not easy. And I think, if I remember right, there was 6 people in the car because it was a commuter type vehicle. So
Wow.
when you go on calls like that, and the other calls that I really hated were holiday calls. You go for Thanksgiving, and here's the whole entire family, and Uncle Bob has had a massive heart attack, and the turkey's getting cold, and the mashed potatoes are getting cold. Everybody's right there. Or Christmas, grandma has has a stroke or a heart attack, or grandpa or whatever, and here's the family opening their gifts, and somebody, tips over, in that scenario. Those are tough calls. Those are really tough calls, because your brain is like, I know what's going on. I know what I'm trained to do, and I'm going to do it. But yet it's Christmas,
Yeah.
and their Christmas for that family will be changed forever.
Yeah.
And so you go on those calls, and it's just. And then the other thing too is, the holidays are hard because some people live. I believe, I don't know if this is real, but I believe there are people that, especially older people, they live to get through that holiday. And so once that holiday's over, like 3 days after that holiday, people are dying. you know it's Christmas, and now it's 4 days after Christmas, and now grandpa dies because he's made it through that holiday, if you will.
Yeah.
I always thought that was weird.
Yeah.
I thought that was kind of weird, but
What I heard you saying there, and I had I had similar experiences in law enforcement, is just it was the trauma, right? It was,
yeah.
I remember going out and doing a death notification for a 30-something-year-old, and her husband had died in I think like a four-wheeler accident or something like that. And as you walk up to the house, you look through the window and you see her in there, and I was about to change her life forever.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, everything's okay. As soon as I knock on the door, things aren't okay.
Mm-hmm.
And it was the impact that I saw on other people that got so heavy for me.
Mm-hmm.
The child abuse calls,
Mm-hmm.
the death scene calls, right? I'm watching you guys do your work. I get there first, I start pushing on a chest, maybe hook up a defibrillator,
Mm-hmm.
and you guys get there and take over. But then I see the trauma.
Mm-hmm.
I see the trauma on people's faces, and knowing, like you just said, that their lives are never going to be the same. That's what I struggled with as a police officer.
Yeah. Yeah, it is the trauma.
So, I mean, you got through an entire career. Was it 2019? What year did you retire?
So I retired in 2021.
All right. So in 2021, you get through an entire career. You get through COVID, sweet mercy, if that wasn't an absolute nightmare for us as first responders, right? And you retire, and everything's okay. Or is it?
So in 2018, I woke up. I was at a fire station, and I woke up in a cold sweat, and I didn't know why. I just was in a full body cold sweat, and I didn't tell anybody. I didn't talk about it, and it started happening more and more frequently. And then I was starting to have problems sleeping because I was having nightmares. I'd never really had nightmares before, and everything just started kind of happening, uh, you know. And over the next 4 years, it just got worse, and my sleep got worse. And that's the one thing that I tell people about PTS is it's a I believe it's I believe this. I'm not a therapist. you know, I'm just a knuckle dragger. But I really believe that when your sleep is affected, that is going to affect everything else in your life.
Yes.
And so I got to the point when I retired in 2021 that I was not sleeping 4 nights out of the week. I wouldn't sleep the night before work. I wouldn't sleep the 2 nights that I was at work, because we worked a 48-96. So we'd work 2 days on, 4 days off. And then sometimes you had an overtime or whatever, so you'd work a 96 or whatever. But then I wasn't sleeping the night I would get home from work. And that was weird, because that's when I'm like, okay, something's wrong.
Yeah.
Something's like, I mean, it was wrong prior to that, not sleeping the night before work, I knew something was wrong. But I'm like, okay, I can still function. I can go to work. I can do my job, you know. And we used to work a 24-hour shift. We'd have one day on and then 2 days off. And then we switched about 10 years into that schedule of working a 48-96. And that's when this started happening. And I think part of that, I think there's a lot of things that go into this puzzle. But the biggest piece of that puzzle is sleep deprivation.
Yes.
Um,
It's
I had,
used, I was just going to say it's used around the world by countries to torture human beings, right?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
And our,
And I felt like I was being tortured.
yeah,
You know, I would go to lay down to go to sleep, and my mind would be going 100 miles an hour. And it was in it, and people were like, well, what were you thinking about? What were you thinking? And I'm like, sometimes I don't even know what I was thinking about. Sometimes it was just I couldn't sleep because my mind wouldn't shut off. Sometimes I was thinking about my family. Sometimes I was thinking about work. Sometimes I was thinking about, if I was trying to, whatever, was going on, I was thinking about it. And it was all well, what if this happens? What if this happens? And what if this happens? And da 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 da. And well, what if this call comes in? And we've never been on this type of call before. And just all these different things that were going on in my mind, and it just was literally driving me crazy. And I got to the point where I started kind of, I think I was changing. My attitude was changing. People saw a difference in me. I was the guy in the department that people, I say this, everybody liked Tim. Everybody just liked Tim. Everybody liked working with Tim. Everybody really liked Tim. And I think they still did when I left, but there was still that Tim's changing,
yeah,
and it's not for the best, but we don't know what it is, and we don't know what to do, and we don't know what to say. And so when I made the announcement that I was going to retire, there was a lot of people that were shocked, but there was a lot of people that were, I think, thankful as well. And I made that decision because I felt like I wasn't able to be the person that I wanted to be anymore. And I thought if I retired, that everything would go back to normal. I'd be able to get I'd be able to get my sleep back. I'd be able to have a better relationship with my bride, because we were starting to have problems. My kids were grown, but so we were kind of getting used to doing this empty nester thing. There was a lot of things going on. I'm thinking, I could be home with her. I can, we have a little hobby farm here, and on Camino Island, and everything's just going to go back to normal. It'll be great. And when I dropped those boots off at the door of the firehouse, I did not realize that that was my identity until it wasn't.
yeah,
And once I left that department, I didn't know who Tim was anymore.
yes,
And my brain literally, Chris, I'm telling you, my brain went from like 100 miles an hour to 1,000 miles an hour.
oh wow,
And I just couldn't think. And this is the weird part, I couldn't hear. Like, Lori would talk to me, and she'd be looking right at me. I'd be looking right at her, and she'd be talking to me. And I had so many things going on in my brain that I couldn't hear her.
yeah.
And it was, I mean, I was just, I didn't know what to do. I was, just really struggling, really having a hard time.
So we're getting close to you and me meeting each other, which is going to be a fun part of the story.
Yeah.
Uh, so I remember just in you telling your story to me before. So you eventually get on with this organization called Stronger Families, and I want us to get deeper into that after the story. You're the law enforcement liaison or law enforcement coordinator, correct? Or not law enforcement, I'm sorry, first responder coordinator.
Yep. I'm the director for first responder. Yep.
Director for first responder. I'm playing with words here.
It's all good.
And so you're going to these wellness conferences, like the first responder conference that Sean Thomas and crew puts on.
Yep.
You're hearing about wellness all the time. And you're talking about how people can get better using the curriculum of Stronger Families. Great curriculum. Again, we'll get to in a sec. But you're at the same time you're hurting and you get to a pivotal point. Maybe give us that build up to this pivotal point where you have to make a decision.
So the pivotal point for me was I was at a first responder conference and I heard these guys talking about their PTS, stories and journeys and everything. And I was like, yeah, okay, okay, okay. And then this guy named Matt Quackenbush gets up there and he speaks. And I'm like, who is this guy? But I'm listening to every single word he's saying. Well, we were going to a lot of these conferences, and so he would speak for an hour, and I'm like, and I wouldn't capture it all, right? I mean, because again, I've got these I've got this, I'm not able to hear people really well, and I'm really kind of struggling with this, and so I'm at like the fourth one. And I told Lori when I came home, I'm like, there's this guy named Matt Quackenbush. And she's like, what? And I go, that's his name. And when he talks about PTS stuff. And I think I might have PTS. And so she starts looking up PTSD and she starts looking up all the symptoms, all the signs, all the everything. And she's like, oh my gosh, this is exactly you. This is you. This is what your issue is. This is what you're dealing with. Yes, you need to talk to this guy, find out what you can do to help yourself and all this kind of stuff. And so I went to another conference and Matt was there. And I walked in and I said, you don't know who I am. And he goes, yeah, I do. You're tall, you're Tim and all this kind of stuff. And I go, look, I want to talk to you. And so he listened to my story and he's like, Tim, you need to go to Deer Hollow. You to go get some help. He goes, you're trying to handle this on your own. And I just started working for Stronger Families. And I said, I can't. I mean, well, he said, and I didn't know anything about it. And he goes, I go, well, what is it? Where is it? And he goes, it's in Draper, Utah. It's a 6-week program. It's an inpatient program, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, 6 weeks? I can't do 6 weeks. I just got hired. This is a full-time job. I can't do it. And he goes, okay, well, could you do an outpatient program that's 6 weeks long that we call the IOP? And I said, and it's on Zoom. And I said, yeah, I could do that. So I did that. And that helped me. But after that 6 weeks was over, and I think the reason it helped me was because it's community, right? You're talking to other people that are kind of in your world. Totally. And struggling with the same thing you're struggling with. And you're hearing that and you're like, oh my gosh, I'm not alone. There's other people out there that are going through the same thing I'm going through. And I don't have to feel bad about this. I don't have to not like myself because of this. And at the end of this 6 weeks, they kind of do an evaluation on you and they're like, yeah, Tim, we think this has been good for you, but really think you should come to treatment. We really think that it would really benefit you to come to Deer Hollow and do treatment. I go, sorry, can't. I got a full-time job. I'm doing this stuff. And so to make a long story short, I get, I don't know, probably 6 months later, my wheels are falling off again. Yeah. And I'm seriously thinking of checking out. And that's a whole nother story that we can talk another time about what changed my mind on that. But I talked to Noel Metter is my boss. He's the president and CEO of Stronger Families. And I said, I'm not doing well. I'm not healthy. And I thought I was getting better, but I'm not. And he goes, what do you want to do? And I said, I want to go to this place called Deer Hollow. And he goes, okay, what do we have to do to make that happen? And I said, well, it's a 6-week program. And August was coming around. We didn't have anything set up in that month. So it almost worked out perfect. And he's like, go. And so I called Matt. I talked to him. He got me in, with Deer Hollow. And next thing I know, I'm going in there. But the thing that happened to me, though, I really want to share this too, is 2 days prior to me getting there, I was mentally ready to go. I was good to go. I have a kind of a men's group. We call it G-Bob, God's Band of Brothers. Bunch of firefighters get together and we just support each other and do this kind of stuff. And I started that when I was a men's ministry director years and years ago, and we kind of just kept it. And a buddy of mine, Bill Hoover, he and I decided, hey, let's do this again because I had retired and he and I were keeping in touch. And so we had like 4 or 5 guys that were getting on a Zoom call with us, and we would, talk about stuff. And it was just really healthy. It was good for us. And I said, hey, man, I'm going to go to this treatment. And I'm going to have to leave this in your hands for 6 weeks at least, maybe longer. And he's like, Tim, we got it, man. You do what you need to do. And, we're going to be praying for you and you're going to get better. And, this is a good thing and all this kind of stuff. And 2 days before I left, I'm over at a friend's house because he knew I was going to treatment. And he's like, hey, I want you to come over and have dinner with us. And so we'll go over and have dinner with another guy that I work with because Bill was one of my battalion chiefs. And I get a phone call from my chief. And he says, Bill and his wife, Christy, were killed in an automobile accident outside of Nevada today. And I'm like, I dropped to my knees. And I just, and, Lori's like, what's wrong? And my buddy, he's a captain in the department. He's like, what's going on? And when I told him what happened, it was just it was like my world just unraveled. And I'm like, I can't go to Deer Hollow. I got to be here for my family. I got to be here for my Kirkland Fire Department family. I got to, help with services. I got to, we got to help the family. We got, all these different things. And some guys knew that I was going to go, and they knew where I was not going, what was going to happen. So they called me and said, hey, Tim, you're still going, right? And I'm like, dude, I don't know. And they're like, Tim, you got to go. Think about what Bill would want.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, okay. So I went. And when I got there, I was a train wreck, absolutely train wreck. And when I walked through the door, I was given a mentor like you always get in there. And then I got to meet my roommate, and my roommate was you.
Yes, it was. And I'll tell you what, I hadn't had a roommate. I think you came in on day 9 for me, and I hadn't had a roommate for like 4 or 5 days. And I was starting to get used to having the master suite. I'm just saying. I was like, hey, I got this room to myself, some privacy, a place I can stretch out. And so when they told me that morning I was getting a roommate on the inside, I was like, son of a gun. And then I don't know if it was that very first time we met and shook hands, brother, or if it was, I know it was at least within that first day that I was thanking God that you were my roommate, because we have a lot of things in common, both with our experiences and our faith. And you were a godsend. I needed you. You were the one that helped me really reconcile, you and a couple of the other guys, on a Sunday night after I'd had a huge blow up on a Friday and I was contemplating walking away. You were
walking down the driveway
and getting discharged against medical advice for breaking that rule. And it was you and that group of guys that helped me really reconcile how this therapy was going to help me heal my brain. And I have no doubt that all of that stuff obviously was for your path, right? And God orchestrating your path, but it's where our two paths collided together. And I believe it was a blessing for me as well. So I'm thankful that you showed up.
Well, thank you. And I'm thankful that you showed up as well. I mean, it was when I heard that, when you were from the Tri-Cities and, the whole deal like that, it was just like, oh, okay. I used to live there. I can kind of relate to that. And then, being a brother in Christ was just absolutely fantastic. And just the way that we were able to communicate with each other, support each other, talk about our families with each other, and be able to understand this material that was just getting, blasted on us, day and night in treatment was so beneficial to me. And I'm just so grateful that you were there, and I'm really, really grateful that you didn't walk down that driveway. And I'm grateful I didn't walk down that driveway. I'm really proud of myself, and I'm proud of you, and I'm proud of the guys that go there and do the work, because it is really hard. And it really made me super uncomfortable in so many different ways,
Yes.
you know, with my dyslexia and that sort of thing. They have you write things down, which I'm not comfortable with. um, and your listeners need to know there's no computers there. They take away your phones. You get 10 minutes to talk to you get 10 minutes to talk to anyone you want, but you only get 10 minutes, and that's it. And use their phone. You don't even get your phone.
Yeah.
And it's really difficult, and everything is in writing. You write down everything, and there's a reason for that. But it was really hard. And then when someone takes your paper and they read it out loud, and you're trying to read my writing, and you're trying to read through my dyslexia and my ADHD and everything, it was so rough. It was so hard.
Yeah. Hey, you, there was a lot of things that you talked about in your story. One of the things that just kept hitting me in my ears was the excuses. I had excuses on why I couldn't go to Deer Hollow. I
Mm-hmm.
almost didn't go when I went because I had things I needed to do, people that were depending on me. I can't hit pause for 6 weeks of my life.
Mm-hmm.
But our lives were on the line. Your vocabulary was you were thinking about checking out.
Mm-hmm.
And I had some very vivid images of me doing the same thing, of dying.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so for folks that are making that excuse, although I can totally relate and appreciate it, is I can't stop. I can't pause life.
Mm-hmm.
But there's times in life that pause is going to save our lives, and it's going to give
Mm-hmm.
us another season or seasons of life. What would you
Mm-hmm.
say to the listeners that maybe are struggling? Maybe some of these things that you've talked
Mm-hmm.
about, they're like, oh my gosh, that's me. The stuff that
Mm-hmm.
Tim was experiencing, I'm experiencing that right now. But I can't pause life. What would you say to those folks that are struggling?
I think another big thing that the word that we need to pop out there is that burden. So many times we feel like we're a burden,
Yeah.
and as first responders, we know what a burden looks like, and we're like, I don't want to be a burden. I
Yeah.
don't want to be a burden to my family or to my kids or to anybody. And you know what? I think they're going to be better off without me.
Yeah.
And I I have a little story that I can share about this.
Please.
So I had a plan. One of the things they ask you when you're in peer support and that sort of thing is you have to talk to people, have you thought about suicide? And it's like, people will say, yeah. And then the next question is, well, do you have a plan? And if they say, yeah, then that means that they need help, more help than what a peer support person can actually provide.
Yeah.
And so, I was at a conference. It was a International Association of Firefighters conference, 7th District, last year, and it was a educational conference that Ricky Walsh puts on, and he represents Idaho, Washington, Montana, and Alaska, and so this is a big conference. And I was representing Stronger Families. We had a little speaking, opportunity there, and we did that. And there was I'm sitting at a booth, and I have a booth next to me, and there's this lady sitting there, and she's working for the IFF. She's working for the International Association of Firefighters, and I'm like looking at her, going, I don't think she's a firefighter, but And so I started talking to her, and I said, "How are you associated with the IFF?" And she goes, my dad was a firefighter. I said, oh, okay. I go, where's he a firefighter at? And she goes, well, he's no longer a firefighter. And I go, oh, did he retire? And she kind of took a breath, and she goes, no, he did retire. and he ended up taking his own life. Boom. Now I'm engaged,
Yeah.
right? Her and I are talking, and we start talking. And as she's telling me her story, she says, she looks at me and she goes, "You have a plan, don't you?"
Mm.
And I, I couldn't hold it back. I just started crying. I just lost it. And she went into what this did to her, what it did to her brother, what it did to her family, what it did to his friends and family. I mean, she just described this for like, I kid you not, like 15, 20 minutes. And she goes, and I have been to so much therapy because I miss my dad so much. And she's like in her 30s, right? And I mean, I could have been her dad, that age group, right? And it was so impactful for me. I mean, it was a God thing. It was an absolutely God moment. And she goes, "Promise me you won't do this." She goes, "Because whatever pain you're in, however, how much suffering you're going through, whatever it is that you're dealing with, it's going to be 10 times that on the people that you love."
Yeah.
And I went, "Okay." And that's when I was like, okay, I got to do something. I got to get some help.
Yeah.
And that's when I came home and we got me into Deer Hollow.
That's a good word, burden, because I would agree. I have felt like a burden. I felt like a failure as a dad, as a
Mm-hmm.
husband. Here's the thing. Yeah, we are creating some trauma for our families when we're showing up with post traumatic stress symptoms, and
Mm-hmm.
whether it's rage, screaming, neglect, not showing up for our kids' events, whatever the case might be that's going on because of your post traumatic stress. But our family doesn't want us gone. They just want us to heal. So
Mm-hmm.
continue to show up as moms and dads, husbands and wives
Yeah.
that they know is there. They know it's at our
Mm-hmm.
root, but it's being clouded by all the post traumatic stress stuff.
I think we have to look at our timeline. And that's something that we did, at Deer Hollow. And if you look at your timeline, I was 61 years old when I went there and turned 62 while I was there. But when you look at your timeline and you look at that 6 week window that you're going to be in treatment, it's nothing.
Yes.
It's absolutely a just a pin drop, right? I mean, it's nothing compared to your lifelong timeline. And I am so glad that I went. And I'm so glad that you went. And I'm so glad that guys, and I'll say people, when I say guys, I'm talking women as well. But these first responders, I'm so glad that they're reaching out and going. But I think what happens, Chris, is we get to the point where we feel alone and we feel isolated. We feel like no one understands where we're at, who we are, what we're going through. Yeah, that's Tim. Yeah, that's Chris's story. But do they really understand my story?
Yeah.
And that is where that encouragement from you and I come of, what, reach out. Just reach out to someone and say, "Hey man, I'm struggling." And if it's not in your department, there's multiple resources. I know you have tons of resources available that you can that people can access. And if you know so, and this is the other thing I think we need to talk about is we'll talk about community and connectiveness. Is if you know a first responder that is struggling and needs help, do not be afraid to take them off to the side and say, "Hey man, I think you could use a little bit of assistance here."
Yeah.
You know,
Used
you
to
don't have to use the word help. I think the word help, we really struggle as first responders to listen to that word help. There's two words that we struggle with. One is help and one is hero. When people call us a hero, we really don't like that. Or when we don't call each other heroes, right? If someone calls us a hero, that's one thing. But there's that other word, right, that I think really people, and it's help. And so, you can use the word assistant, you can use the word someone to talk to, whatever it is, but reach out to that person that is struggling, and just let them know that, hey, I see you. I don't understand what you're going through, but I see you. And I really want to encourage you to seek out some assistance.
What I would like to replace it with, and I'm borrowing this from Tom Satterley, All Secure podcast, great guy, Delta Force, is training. That's what this is. They didn't give you your boots and your turnouts and a hose and say, all right, just go fight a fire. Try to attack it from the base, side to side. They didn't verbally tell you how to fight a fire. They trained you on how to fight a fire. They trained me how to search a building. They didn't give me a flashlight and a gun and said, all right, we'll get together with your guys and on your own time, try to figure this out. But we don't train people on how to handle trauma in these professions. We talk about it. We give books. We sometimes even have a great presenter like Matt come in and give some great tools, and then we send everyone back. We don't do team training traditionally. There is some exceptions, but we don't do team training on how to handle the trauma and the loss that we experience as first responders. And so that's what you need, brothers and sisters. You need training. You don't need help. You don't need whatever other word you're struggling with. You need to be trained and go into a boot camp for 6 weeks at a Deer Hollow, at a Warrior's Heart, at a Shatterproof, at a first responder wellness. Go into one of these inpatient places, and there's a whole lot more than that, where they're going to train you how to handle trauma and loss, and it's going to heal you as well.
Chris, I am going to use that from now on. I'm going to use the word training. Go get the training you need.
That's what it is. That's all it is. And if we had been doing this, my grandpa was a police officer, my dad was, if that would have been a piece of our legacy as a profession, that we saw this as training. I don't know, but I don't think I'd be in the shoes I was in.
Yeah.
If it was so permeated through our culture that we put the effort towards training around trauma as we do towards everything else in our professions, I think we'd be in a different spot.
I use that word all the time, and I'll tell you when we are doing our with Stronger Families. I tell people when I go out and talk about Stronger Families and what that organization is all about, I tell them, you know what? You are good at what you do. I talk because I'm talking to first responders. So I'm talking to police officers, firefighters, border patrol, dispatchers,
corrections,
nurses, corrections, Department of Corrections. I'm talking to all these different folks out there that are in that first responder kind of umbrella, if you will. And I tell them, I know you're good at what you do. And you know why? It's because you've gotten good training. What we don't get is we don't get training on how to have a good relationship. And so that the training that we get, it's usually from how we were raised, the people that raised us. And that's not always healthy.
Yeah.
I know it wasn't for me, and I know it wasn't for my bride. And so you bring the two of us together because we fall in love, and now we're supposed to be successful when we don't have any training, right? And also in the fire service or the police department service, any of these first responder services, any of them out there, how much training do we get on people's personalities, and how much training do we get on, relationships and how to build those relationships?
We don't.
And how much training do we get going from being a first responder to how to go home and engage in a healthy manner?
Yeah.
We don't. And I think the PTS portion that we're talking about, I think that's getting better. I think that's getting out to departments across the country, because I travel all over the country with Stronger Families, going to health and wellness conferences and doing couples retreats and all these different things that we do, wellness block trainings and all these things. I'm talking to these folks. I'm talking to chiefs. I'm talking to peer support people, sheriffs, all the time. And that's the thing that I'm seeing is people are recognizing that PTS is real, and we need to do some training,
Yeah.
help our people. So when it gets to the point, hopefully we can help them before it gets to that point where they don't know what to do.
Yeah. Give us an overview about some of that training, specifically that Stronger Families is making possible. What kind of different categories of training does Stronger Families bring to the first responder world?
Yeah. Stronger Families is a nonprofit organization, and they've been around since the late 80s. So, let's say 25 years or so. And they primarily have been in the world of the military. And they have been doing these couples retreats. It's a 2 to 3 day seminar, if you will. And we have facilitators that go out. We have about, I want to say, close to 2,000 chaplains that are trained in the oxygen curriculum, is what it's called. It's called Oxygen. And I think that's a really cool title because we need oxygen, right? And one of the things that we were trained when we were at Deer Hollow was that deep breathing and the Wim Hof method and all the different ways of stopping and just breathing. That I think is so important for us to do. And so they have this program called Oxygen. And it's basically 8 chapters in the book, in the guide. And what happened was they were starting to have first responders that were in the military that went through the program. They said, "Hey, I'm no longer in the military. I'm now a first responder. Do you still have this curriculum?" Because we took this class, and it was really good. And so they thought, well, maybe we should reach out to the first responders. And so they kind of started dabbling in it for a while. And they got some people together to kind of help them, take a look at it and that sort of thing. And then the board of directors said, "Hey, man, we think you maybe need to hire someone to help, drive this portion of the train." And so that was about the time that I was a month out of being in retirement. And Noel Metter contacted me, and I originally said no. I said, "No, we're not doing this. I'm not the guy. You need someone really important, someone that knows people and, stuff like that." And he wouldn't take no for an answer. And so Lori and I decided to, okay, we'll try it for a year. Yeah. And see how it goes. And we've now going on, I think, 3 years. In July will be 3 years. But the curriculum you're talking about, I kind of veered off a little bit. The curriculum is all about how to have a better relationship. And the one really cool thing that we do is we have people go through a personality assessment. We have a single personality assessment. And if they're going to a retreat, we also have a couples assessment. So there's 2 different assessments that you go through before you actually come to our retreat. When you come to the retreat, we ask you to print this out in color and bring it with you to the retreat. And now we're going to have you explore, how does your personality and your partner's personality, how can we help mesh them together? And go through these different tools. And these are actual tools that you're going to get to practice at the retreat. And then you can continue to do them when you go home. So it's not like, "Hey, we're really glad you're here for the weekend. We're going to, talk to you for, 2 days and then see you later." It's no, you're going to actually get tools that you can go home and actually connect again with those tools. And the reason we do it as a first responder is because being a first responder is just so different than any other job, that's out there. We all have stress. Everyone has stress in their relationship. I'm not saying that there's not stress situations out there. But as a first responder, we're dealing with life and death situations. We're dealing with horrible schedules. We're dealing with all these different things. And right now across the country, we're understaffed. We're not appreciated. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. And that only builds more stress for that first responder and their partner at home. We talk about PTS, we talk about your PTS, my PTS, we went to treatment, but what happened with our spouses?
Exactly.
They sat at home, they took care of the kids, they paid the bills, they handled everything in those 6 weeks that we were gone,
Yeah.
and the time before we left, because we were freaking train wrecks before we left, so we weren't really good for anything prior to then. And then we come back. How do we re-engage?
Poorly.
How slowly? Is that what you say?
I said poorly, but
Poorly.
actually I've re-engaged better than I was doing before I left. It's just
Yeah.
the healing isn't done. The work isn't done.
Mm-hmm.
That's really what I was getting at with the joke was uh,
Yeah.
6 weeks of therapy is going to do some amazing things for you. It's going to put the wheels under the bus to get you
Mm-hmm.
moving. But it's much like the oxygen weekend retreat. Going to Deer Hollow for 6 weeks is just getting you moving towards the direction of healing so that you can go home and continue the hard work in your life and your relationships.
Absolutely. One of the questions that I sometimes will ask couples is I'll say, who's your superhero? Who's your superhero? Because my superhero is my bride.
Yes. She makes humans. That's a superhero human spirit.
Yeah.
She makes human beings. Who would have thought?
Right. Right. And so with a superhero, they always have a cape, but they also have a utility belt.
Yeah.
Well, sometimes our utility belts are a little bit empty. And that's what Stronger Families does. They give you tools to put on your utility belt.
Tim, because you've given me the opportunity to get trained up in the material, I'm a little familiar with it. So let's talk about what if an organization wants the same skill sets that you bring at these weekend relationship focused seminars. What if an organization, a police department, fire department, Department of Corrections, wants you to equip their staff with the same similar tools, but that will impact them in the workplace?
That is such a great question, because when Stronger Families brought me on, they said, "Hey, what do you think of this material and everything?" And my bride and I looked at it and we're like, "Where was this 30 years ago?"
Yeah, totally.
But I told him, I said, "I don't know how this could be done, but this needs to be in the work world."
Yeah.
And he kind of looks at me and we started talking about it. I'm like, dude, there are so many departments out there and agencies out there that are so dysfunctional that they need help on how to, and again, I said the word help because they do. There's agencies out there that are struggling with their communications. They're struggling with how to make transitions. They're struggling on retaining people. I'm talking to agencies across the country and they're like, "Do your program help people like retain people? Because we're spending a lot of money trying to, get people. And then when we get them, they're leaving in 3 to 5 years." And, they understand there's a reason for that, but will our training help them? And so we put together what's called a wellness block training. And it is 7 different topics. We call them blocks. And we communicate on how to have better communication. We go through that personality assessment so that first responder can understand who they are, but also they can look around the room of their team and go, "Oh, I understand you better." And we give you tools on how do you want to be communicated to? What works for you? What doesn't work for you? And it gives you an opportunity to really understand where people are coming from and the differences the differences that we have with each other. But what those differences actually do is bring strength to the organization.
Yes.
And so one of the ones that we have, so from the department standpoint, they can bring us in and do these wellness block trainings. We just got back from California. We're in Marin, Southern Marin Fire Department. It's kind of the San Francisco, Sausalito area down there. And we had about, I think, 5 different departments represented. And we did a train the trainer. And so what we do is we come in, we teach you these 7 blocks of training, and then we have you learn how to look at the script and put in your own story. And so we did that with you, Chris. I mean, we did that with you, and you're going to be doing that with the Yakima Guild there in January. We're going to do a date night, and that's going to be a little different because that's not a work environment, right? That's going to be that relationship at home environment, but you're going to take that material called Bridging the Gap, and you and Jaimie are going to talk about how do you take that first responder from work who's all stressed out, dealing with all this stuff, is hyper vigilant, all these different things. How do you get that person to get back into self and be able to re-engage and be able to be a functional, healthy person in their family? And that was a train the trainer. And so now you're taking your stories, you and Jaimie's stories, putting it in that script, and then you're going to share that from your hearts to those police officers that are going to be in that room in that date night. So we have date nights that we have set up for these trainings. We have department wellness block trainings that we have for the department to help them better communicate. So it's all about relationship. And we need to have a better relationship at work, because if we have a better relationship at work, we're going to have a better chance of having a better relationship at home.
Folks have to hear this. This is not mamby-pamby stuff. This is literally rubber meets the road. It's no different than how do you hook up a fire hose to a fire hydrant, or how do you do a felony traffic stop. These are skills that you either learn or you don't learn, and you're going to have consequence either way. So choose not to learn the skills on how to hook up a hose to a fire hydrant. You're probably not going to be able to put out the fire. Choose to not train on doing a felony traffic stop, and you're not going to bring the best tactics to that situation to have good outcomes. Choose not to learn how to engage in relationship, both at home and at work, and you're literally rolling the dice. I was rolling the dice. I have rolled the dice over the last 25 years. Sometimes I got lucky and I did it pretty good as a husband, and sometimes I did it really lousy. I'm excited about this training though, folks. You could reach out to Tim. Obviously, with his role as director, you could reach out to me. You can get on the Stronger Families website and learn more about it there. But please dig into this a little bit, because I really believe that this training is beneficial to all of our first responders. Tim, we're running out of time. You and I haven't even really touched on our time at Deer Hollow. That'll have to be another conversation, because I honestly think we could come up with like a volume of 10 podcasts for that.
Absolutely.
So much to share there. If folks didn't know you before and they want to connect with you, where are the best places for them to either connect with you or follow you?
Yeah, you can find me on on the Facebook, Instagram, Tall Tim. I went ahead and changed that to Tall Tim. On LinkedIn as well. That's in as Tall Tim as well, because that's kind of what everybody calls me now. So I'm like, okay, well, if they're looking up, they're going to remember Tall Tim, then I probably should change it to that. So yeah, and Stronger Families is the same thing. You just go to the website there, and they have an Instagram as well. And so yeah, just whatever we can do to help you or be a resource for you. I have a personal resource list that I've put together that kind of tells my story, but it also has all the different agencies, or not agencies, but organizations that are out there, books and podcasts. Your podcast is on there. I mean, there's a lot of resources that are available that sometimes, as first responders or a spouse of a first responder, they just don't know about it. And that's the other thing I want to plug, if it's okay, is Stronger Families recognizes that spouses need they want to have community too. And so we are starting a spouse network, and there'll be information on that in the on the webpage as well. But February 8th, we're going to do here in the Puget Sound. We're going to do a spouse network 1 day like seminar, and it'll be just for spouses to come together, and we're just going to love on them and try to give them some tools to help them deal with that. And the biggest thing that we want to do is have them be able to bridge over the different agencies that are out there, and build that connectivity and be able to do that.
Love it. Well, folks, you're going to need to get on. Also, for sheriffs and police chiefs, Stronger Families is organizing a leaders only weekend retreat in February. So if that's grabbing your attention, get on the Stronger Families website, dig around. It's a nonprofit. They're subsidizing the cost with very generous donors, making it to where it's more affordable for families and for organizations to attend this training and get the valuable training on how to have better relationships. Tim, time is my greatest commodity. I can't make more of this stuff. You've given me so much of yours, not even talking about this podcast, but at Deer Hollow and beyond. Brother, thank you.
Thank you. It's been an honor and a privilege, and I just want to thank you, the listeners out there, and please pass it around. Let's get this help out there to more people.
Love it. Thank you, brother. Have a great day.
All right, you too.
Wow, folks, what did you think about my interview with Tall Tim? Wow. Folks, if you have been listening to the show for a while, you know that we usually stick to that 1 hour mark, and I just couldn't stop. Tim had so many experiences, so much story to share, and him and I didn't even get into our joint story at Deer Hollow, the PTSD Recovery Center where we met each other. Maybe I'll bring him back on, because him and I have a lot of story that we could share from that experience that I think you as the listeners would find value in. Hey folks, Jaimie and I want to hear from you. How are we doing here on the podcast? There's a few different ways for you to communicate back to us. First and foremost, please follow us on whatever podcast platform you're listening on. That will cause the next episode to pop up in your dashboard. You can also rate and review us. If you're listening on Spotify or Apple, there's 5 stars waiting on the main page. We'd really appreciate a 5-star rating if we've earned 5 stars, folks. If we haven't earned 5 stars, instead send me a scathing email. No, not scathing, I hope not at least. Send me an email at chris@gravityct.com. Let us know how to make a better future, marriage, Monday topics, or guests for me to interview. Folks, we only get to live this life once. Let's go out and take care of the people in our tribes. Take care of each other. God bless.